स्वपदान्तिकम् वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरोः श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगणरघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवम् साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादां सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च हे कृष्ण करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिकान्त राधाकान्त नमोऽस्तु ते तप्त काञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। मद्गवीरपि गोपाल स्वीकुर्यात् कृपया यदि तदैवासाम्भयः पीत्वा ऋष्येयुस्तत्प्रिया जनाः। This is Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is. Translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. We are discussing text 21 of the 9th chapter. The 9th chapter is entitled The Most Confidential Knowledge. Texts 20 and 21 together are usually taken together as a semantic unit, that they're both describing the same kind of person. The person who wants to be pious but also wants to enjoy Krishna's things. So let me just review yesterday's verse because it's nice to take them together. Trayī-dharmam somapah pūta-pāpā yajñairištva svarga-lokaṁ prārthayante te puṇyamasadya surendra-lokam ashnanti divyan divideva bhogan. Those who study the Vedas and drink the soma juice seeking the heavenly planets worship me indirectly. Purified of sinful reactions, they take birth on the pious heavenly planet of Indra, where they enjoy godly delights. Now tonight's verse, text 21. Te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālaṁ kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti evam trayī-dharmam anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālam kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti evam trayī-dharmam anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālam kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti evam trayī-dharmam anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālaṁ kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti evaṁ trayī-dharmam anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālam kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti evaṁ trayī-dharmam anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālam kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti evaṁ trayī-dharmam anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālam kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti evaṁ trayī-dharmam anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālam kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti evaṁ trayī-dharmam anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālam kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante te, they, tam, that, bhuktvā, enjoying, svarga-lokam, heaven, viśālam, vast, kṣīṇe, being exhausted, puṇye, the results of their pious activities, martya-lokam, to the mortal earth, viśanti, fall down, evam, thus, trayī, of the three Vedas, dharmam, doctrines, anuprapannāḥ, following, gata-āgatam, death and birth, kāma-kāmāḥ, desiring sense enjoyments, labhante, attain. Translation: when they have thus enjoyed vast heavenly sense pleasure and the results of their pious activities are exhausted, they return to this mortal planet again. Thus, those who seek sense enjoyment by adhering to the principles of the three Vedas achieve only repeated birth and death. Kindly repeat. When they have thus enjoyed vast heavenly sense pleasure and the results of their pious activities are exhausted, they return to this mortal planet again. Thus, those who seek sense enjoyment by adhering to the principles of the three Vedas achieve only repeated birth and death. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. One who is promoted to the higher planetary systems enjoys a longer duration of life and better facilities for sense enjoyment. Yet, one is not allowed to stay there forever. One is again sent back to this earth upon finishing the resultant fruits of pious activities. He who has not attained perfection of knowledge, as indicated in the Vedanta Sutra, Janmadi asya yataha, or in other words, he who fails to understand Krishna, the cause of all causes, becomes baffled about achieving the ultimate goal of life and is thus subjected to the routine of being promoted to the higher planets and then again coming down, as if situated on a Ferris wheel, which sometimes goes up and sometimes comes down. The purport is that instead of being elevated to the spiritual world, from which there is no longer any possibility of coming down, one simply revolves in the cycle of birth and death on higher and lower planetary systems. One should better take to the spiritual world to enjoy an eternal life full of bliss and knowledge and never return to this miserable material existence. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālaṁ kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti. Evam trayī-dharmam anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante. When they have thus enjoyed vast heavenly sense pleasure and the results of their pious activities are exhausted, they return to this mortal planet again. Thus, those who seek sense enjoyment by adhering to the principles of the three Vedas achieve only repeated birth and death. In this world, we do two things only. We either try to exploit Krishna's energies, or we try to escape from Krishna. Somehow or other, by any means we can find, we have dedicated ourselves to this ideal, this twofold ideal. And we've been describing different kinds of alternatives to Krishna consciousness in the recent verses here, particularly after Krishna talks about his pure devotees in text number 14. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. If that verse doesn't describe you, then you probably fit into one of these other verses that are being described. So some people are cultivating knowledge, they're trying to escape from the reactions of their karma, and they're trying to escape from the illusion and the entanglement of karmic activities. But they're trying to do so without surrendering to Krishna. That's the problem. On the other hand, there are those who are offering all kinds of Vedic sacrifices, and they're seeking elevation thereby. But again, they're not necessarily thinking of Krishna's pleasure as much as they're thinking of their own. These are the two options: exploitation or escape. We call it bhoga or tyaga, or we also call it bhukti or mukti, or we call it karma or jnana, or we call it dharma or moksha. You get the idea. In so many terms, the same two things are described throughout the Vedic literatures. So in these two verses, texts 20 and 21, Krishna is particularly aiming at the fruitive workers. We don't find very many fruitive workers in today's world. People don't have enough faith to be fruitive workers. And even if they did have faith, they don't have the adhikar to be fruitive workers. They can't do it. It's too difficult. We don't have any discipline, we can't follow our vows, we don't really understand anything, we have very little knowledge. Srimad Bhagavatam describes us pretty well in the beginning. Prainalpayusha sabhya kalau asmin yuge janaha manda sumanda matayaha manda bhagya hi upadrutaha. We are short-lived, we have alpayusha sabhya kalau asmin yuge janaha manda sumanda mati. We're slow, we're lazy, we're not so bright, we're not educated, and we're misfortunate or unfortunate because we've not been very pious in the past. Manda bhagya. And upadruta, we're always in a rush, always in agitated mode, always disturbed, as Prabhupada translates it. So this is our unfortunate condition in Kali Yuga. We can hardly take advantage of the sacrificial program that is given in the Vedas. What kind of Vedas? Here it's mentioned twice in yesterday's verse and again in today's verse. Trayī-dharmam or trayī-vidya. What does it mean? Trayī-veda. We heard yesterday's purport that Trayī-veda means the Rig, Sama, and Yajur-veda. Actually, the Veda is complete in these three, and that's why it's called Trayī-vidya, knowledge of the three. And Prabhupada's purport also explains, sometimes here in North India especially, we meet somebody who has the surname Trivedi, or maybe at least he's a Dvivedi. Sometimes you get a Chaturvedi here in Mathura, Chaubes. Don't really hear of Ekavedis. But the Vedas are actually considered to be complete with just the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Yajur Veda. Everything is there. Atharva Veda only consists of reiteration from these other three. So there really is no Atharva Veda in the sense that nothing new is being added. Atharva Veda is just repeating things from previous Vedas. So that's called Trayī-vidya or Trayī-dharmam. Trayī-vidya, vidya means mantra, vidya also means knowledge. Here it would probably mean mantra because we're concerned with Vedic sacrifices which depend on Vedic mantras. When we chant the Vedic mantras, we can to a large degree become freed from sinful activities if they're not mahapatakas. But considering the prevalence of the mahapatakas, or the greatly sinful activities in this modern day and age, that's not really enough to help us so much. So we take shelter of Harinam Sankirtan. We'll discuss that further. But Trayī-vidya means the mantras of the three Vedas, and Trayī-dharmam means the observances which are described in those three Vedas. That means either the sacrificial observances or the otherwise, the Varna and Ashram dharma is part of that Trayī-dharma. Whatever dharma is being described in the three Vedas, this is what the persons who are desiring elevation to svarga-loka take shelter of. Anuprapannā, they surrender to that. And they are quickly elevated, in fact. Surendra-lokam ashnanti divyān divideva bhogan. They enjoy godly delights for a long time in the planets or the societies of the best of the suras, the surendras. So that's the result of their piety, if you could muster piety. We know from chapter 14 in Bhagavad Gita, text number 18. Anybody know that verse? Chapter 14, text number 18. I'll give you a hint. Urdham. Yes. Urdham gachanti sattvastha. If you're situated in sattva guna, you go up. That means you're going to svarga-loka. If you're situated in sattva guna, we hardly find that, as we've been discussing. Nowadays, it's very difficult to find that. Most of us are in the modes of passion and ignorance. What happens when you're in the mode of passion? Urdhvam gachanti sattvastha madhye tishtanti rajasaha. Those persons who are passionate, they stay here. All of their progress is horizontal, so to speak. It's not really progress. You're just moving around in the same passionate place, which is this martya-lokaṁ, mortal worlds. And if you've been bad, then what happens? If you've been sinful and don't care, jaghanya guna vrittistha adho gachanti tamasaha. Then you're considered to be tamasic and you go down. It's abominable. What's down below? Either you get hellish worlds where there's primarily suffering with a little relief sometimes. Actually, we're turning this world into hell very quickly also, in case you haven't noticed. It's really speeding up, it seems. But either you go into these hellish realms or you just exit humanity altogether and become what? Animal. Think about what it means to be an animal. We were discussing this recently. Srila Prabhupada said death means you go to bed as a human being, you go to sleep as a human being. Next morning when you wake up and enter the bathroom to brush your teeth, you look in the mirror and instead of a face you have a snout. Try to call your wife for help and the only thing that comes out is barking. And you can't even, in fact, you can't even grab your toothbrush either because you don't have hands anymore. Think about it. It's serious business to have all your facility removed like this. But it happens. Good people like you and me, who are just, maybe had some bad association or made some bad choices in life, they wake up with hooves in the next life. So it's a problem. That's jaghanya guna vrittistha, those who are situated in the abominable mode. That's why it's called the abominable mode. Tamo guna. Be afraid of it. It is very frightening. So here we're talking about those who are sattvic enough that they can, at least through disciplining themselves, they can abide by the Vedic injunctions. Yesterday we heard, nobody goes to the svarga planets unless and until they are what? Okay, no, I'm talking about text 20. We heard it yesterday. Krishna says, puta papa, purified of sin. Until you become sinless, unless you become sinless, you're not going to the heavenly planets. It doesn't matter what you think you are. Or if you think, well, I'm a devotee, and Prabhupada said devotees are going to the heavenly planets if they don't go back to Godhead, but that's assuming that you're following his instructions. Are you doing that? We have so many instructions that we are not following, isn't it? For example, since we're talking about trayī-dharmam, we've already mentioned in passing, varnashram dharma, that's one of them. It's a responsibility. If you do not perform your niyatam karma, or your dharma, your swadharma, your obligatory dharma, then you incur sinful reaction. And if you incur sinful reactions, I'm sorry to say, you do not go to the heavenly planets. You stay here maybe, or depends on how bad. There are some people who consider themselves devotees, and they don't even follow their initiation vows. Even in ISKCON, these people are there. Maybe even in this room. So, this is a problem. Te tam bhuktvā svarga-lokam viśālaṁ kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti. But even if you can discipline yourself, even if you have become sinless, and that's quite an attainment, in case you're looking around, then Krishna still says, it's going to run out when the karma runs out. You build up so many credits, just like if you live in the People's Republic of China. Everybody gets a credit score, like it or not. You don't have a choice. That's the nature of communism. No choice. The chairman makes the choices for everybody. Anyway, so you've got a credit score, and if you do things that the chairman likes, then you get all facility. If you do things that the chairman doesn't like, then you get demotions, and your facilities are limited. You can't even take a train out of the country. You can't even flee. That's the nature of those systems. You can call it a closed system, but kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti. Here in this system, when we are pious, we're elevated. When we're impious, we're degraded. But even when we're pious and are elevated, it ends. It's not an eternal thing. Nothing here is forever. There's one of my favorite poems by Robert Frost. He says, nature's first green is actually what color? Gold. He's talking about the autumn. When in certain places, maybe not so much here, but the leaves turn yellow and they fall off the trees. So before springtime, there was a previous autumn season and a previous winter. It's the hardest hue to hold. Actually, all the hues are hard to hold, but for some reason he wrote that. An early leaf is a flower, but it's only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, and in this way Eden sank to grief. Dawn goes down and yields its position to the day. Nothing gold can stay, he says. Even if you don't have a good deal in this world, then that's not going to stay either. So maybe that's a relief for some persons. If you've got a good situation and you're happy and basically satisfied here, just like a pig is satisfied in the nully, we see them performing their prescribed duties very faithfully, running up and down the nully with mouth wide open, because that's what they like. Nice hot meal, especially 6 a.m. in the wintertime. They think they've got it pretty good. So, and we may find out soon enough what it's like if we don't play our cards right in this life. But kṣīṇe puṇye martya-lokam viśanti. If you've been pious and elevated to heaven, you have to come back again, my friend. You have no say in the matter, because someone else is controlling this situation. And if you've been bad and if you've got a suffering lifetime right now, then cheer up, it will come to an end. If you're going through hell, Winston Churchill said, keep going. So, evaṁ trayī-dharmam anuprapannā gata-āgatam kāma-kāmā labhante. If we're holding on to our desires and we're motivated to act or not to act, as the case may be, by those desires instead of by Krishna, then what do we get? Gata-āgatam. We get coming and going. One of the acharyas, forget who it was, maybe Sridhar Swami is glossing this as gata-āgatam. Means the same thing. Having gone and having come, aate jate hain, as they say in Hindi. So this is the problem. No matter what your station in life, you're not going to be able to hold on to it. And therefore, an intelligent person, according to Mundaka Upanishad, he looks around and sees, wait a minute, if there's nothing here but karma, and adding karma to karma produces more karma, and subtracting karma from karma produces karma still, maybe less karma, but still karma, then there's nothing here but karma. What is the point of all this karma? Parikshya lokan karma chitan brahmano nirvedam ayan nastya krita kritena. What is that? This person should approach the bona fide spiritual master to find out what is absolute truth. Tad vijnanartam sagurum evabhigachet samit pani shrotriyam brahmanishtam. And how do you approach the spiritual master? Humbly. Samit pani. You have to be ready to do some menial service. wash the pots, clean the floor, do something practical and do something humbling also. And in this way, pariprashnena sevaya, Krishna tells us back in chapter 4, we can actually learn the absolute truth, what's beyond all this coming and going, all the up karma and the down karma. This is an analogy Prabhupada mentions in his purport. Ferris wheel, we know every fair. Yeah, inko kya bolte hain Hindi mein? These things where the kids sit on and they're spinning around. Huh? Not jhula exactly, it's a wheel. Yes. So same thing, Ferris wheel. Kalidas in his, I think it's Meghaduta, he says also, this life is like spokes of a fast spinning wheel. If you're on top one split second, what difference does it make? The next split second you're going to be on the bottom. Nothing is significant here, it's so short. And it seems like a long time when we're young. When we're young, it seems like we've got all the power and all the facility and the future is great, and it's going to take a long time, because a week lasts a long time when you're very young. But when you get old, it seems like time speeds up, because actually you're slowing down. So it doesn't last that long, actually. It really doesn't. 100 years is just a flash. And before we know it, if you even live 100 years, most people don't. We hear every day, somebody came home and just dropped without explanation, just out, finished. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like we said, you have no say in the matter. That is the rule here. So it's a tough place to live, this material world, and this is why Prabhupada is urging us here. One should better take to the spiritual world to enjoy an eternal life, full of bliss and knowledge, and never return to this miserable material existence. If the word material is used, that means it's going to have a beginning and it's going to have an end. And what does Krishna say about this kind of happiness? Adi antavanta kaunteya nateshu ramate kon buddha. The smart people don't do this. They can see through it. It has a beginning and it has an end. That means it's not substantial enough. What is the definition of substantiality? What's real, according to Krishna in chapter 2? He says, well, if it's true, then it has no end. Or any beginning, for that matter. Nasate vidyate bhavo na bhavo vidyate sataha. Upayorapi drishtontas tvanayos tattvadarshipī. The tattvadarshis, those who see the truth, they know that which is real doesn't come to an end, and that which is unreal cannot last. Look at all the things that don't last in this world. It's pretty much everything. So this is not the real world. This is a fake world. And therefore it's full of fake news. The whole world is fake. Only fake people come here. We're not really in our actual constitution. We're pretending. What does Devamrita Swami call this? Hiding in unnatural happiness. That's his book. Hiding in unnatural happiness. This happiness of the material world, it's foreign to us. It's alien. It's not real. But we don't like the alternative, because the alternative means to surrender, and therefore we're hiding. And we mentioned already, there are two ways that we hide. One, we try to become the bhogi. That's what's being described in tonight's verse. And if you try to be a clean bhogi, then that means you're following the Vedic injunctions for how to envy Krishna. But it's envy. And if you are a rascal and don't even care about the Vedic injunctions because you're shameless, then that's called a papi. Just out and out rascal, demon. Either way, they're hiding in unnatural happiness, because this world itself is not real, and therefore the unreal people come here. People who are not genuine. So these are hard things to swallow, hard pill to swallow, as they say. So I think that if there's a primary point that Prabhupada is making in tonight's purport, it is that even if you go to the heavenly planets, you can't stay there. What is the point of living in an existence where you have to keep dying every once in a while? It's kind of like here in North India, anything that requires electricity, any time it can go out. That's like this world. Just imagine, every time the lights go out, then you die. then we can understand it a little better. It's within our time frame of our conditional conception of life, but nothing here is going to allow us to stay forever. We have to keep getting interrupted, and then once we're interrupted, we're sent to some place that we may not appreciate so much if we've not been nice to ourselves or other people. Then we have to suffer for that, and this is the point. As Prabhupada says here, the purport is that instead of being elevated to the spiritual world from which there is no longer any possibility of coming down, one simply revolves in the cycle of birth and death on higher and lower planetary systems. We can read about these. There's enough about the higher planetary systems in Srimad Bhagavatam. There's enough about the lower planetary systems also in Srimad Bhagavatam. It's really a fascinatingly variegated situation here in this world. We have such stunted, limited conceptions of life, about what's normal and about what's real and about what life is. We have no idea what life is. It's so variegated. There are so many species that we have never counted and don't know anything about. There are even dimensions and colors that we don't have I cannot even imagine. These things are there, but they're not revealed to those whose karma is insufficient. If your karma is perfect, you know practically everything, like Brahma, and therefore you can engineer everything, because you know everything. Virtually you know everything. And you can also become so sinful and so unfortunate that you can know practically nothing. Biologists, they know about this. What do they call those things? Neural nets. Like a one-celled organism, or even smaller than that. That they just, they can hardly, you can imagine. How is such a being even conscious? The consciousness can become so limited. It's frightening. 8,400,000 non-devotional options are there. And all you have to do is be reckless with your human form of life, careless about where you're going and what you're doing, and you may end up in one of those 8,400,000 alternatives. What is it like to be a penguin? Can you still love someone if you're an aardvark? Do you even know what an aardvark is? They don't have them here. So anyway, these are a few of the ruminations that we can discuss and consider with regards to tonight's verse and purport. It's very simple. It's really not so complicated, and for that reason the acharyas have not written a whole lot about it. I think Ramanujacharya sets the tone. He says, Te tam viśālaṁ svarga-lokam bhuktvā tad-anubhava hetu bhute puṇye kṣīṇe punarapi martya-lokam viśanti. Those persons who have gone to the heavenly planets, which are vast. We've been talking about how material existence itself is vast. Even the heavenly planets alone are also vast here, according to Krishna. Viśālam means vast. And bhuktvā, they've enjoyed that thing. Tanurubhava hetu bhute puṇye kṣīṇe. But the punya on which that experience is dependent that is coming to an end again and again and again, and therefore, martya-lokaṁ viśanti. We have to come back to this world. Evam trayī-anta siddha-jnana vidhuraha. Those persons who are bereft of the perfect knowledge that comes about when you're done with this trayī-dharma, when you're done with what Krishna calls traygunya viśaya, elsewhere in the Gita. Anybody know that verse? Traygunya viśaya veda nistraygunya bhava. He tells Arjuna that you try to rise above this traygunya stuff. Traygunya means it's made out of passion or ignorance or at best goodness. Most of this world is actually, Krishna says everything in this world in chapter 14. There's nothing here except these three modes, practically speaking. So, traygunya viśaya veda, nistraygunya bhava. Even the Vedas and the worlds that they create for us, these are also just permutations and combinations of these three modes of material nature, and Krishna is telling us to go beyond this. Very hard for us to imagine that, actually. But that's, if we can imagine that, if we can actually realize that, even better yet, then we're called siddha-jnana. So here we're talking about persons who are siddha-jnana vidhura, bereft of perfect knowledge because they're stuck. They cannot go beyond the limit or the anta of trayī-dharma, the three modes, the three Vedas, however you want to take it. And kāma svarga-adi, kāma-kāmādi, kāma-kāmāḥ. Persons who are desirous only of the desirable happiness that's available in the heavenly planets, etc. Kevala trayī-dharmam anuprapannā, and have therefore taken shelter or surrendered to the trayī-dharma, gata-āgatam labhante. And we've already discussed gata-āgatam means they have to keep coming and going. Atyasthira svargadīn anubhūya puṇah nivartanta ityartha. The idea is that they have to keep coming back again and again, even after having experienced svarga-loka and other places that are very, very temporary. Asthira, flickering. Prabhupada in his own translation, Prabhupada had this translated as flickering. Here the editors of the BBT have changed Prabhupada's translation, and now they say they achieve only repeated birth and death, which is fine because it's faithful to the text still. But Prabhupada used the word flickering, which is also being used here by Ramanujacharya. Asthira, atyasthira, svarga, etc. Okay, Madhvacharya says, Tatapi mad bhajanam eva anya devata bhajanat varamiti darshayati. He wants to show with this verse, Krishna is showing us that worshipping him is better than worshipping other devatas. Quite simple and clear. Trayī-vidya ityadina. Okay. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur simply says gatāgataṁ in this verse means puṇah mrityur-janmani, coming back again to repeated birth and death. I'm going to stop here because there's not a whole lot more to add. And I didn't have time to glance at the other commentators, particularly Sridhar Swami has said some things. Actually, I have a translation of Sridhar Swami, which I can... He's saying essentially the same things. He says, having enjoyed the extensive heavenly sphere, when their virtue is exhausted, they enter the mortal world. Thus, those who take refuge in the religion of the Vedas, desirous of enjoyment, go and come. Okay, does anyone have any questions or comments? Yes, Prabhuji.
Does the soul ever get to the point where it becomes completely annihilated?
No. You ask a simple question, you get a simple answer. Because soul is a misnomer, in fact. Soul is a Judeo-Christian concept that does not apply to Vedic teaching. Vedic teaching does not discuss the soul, strictly speaking. It discusses Atman. And Atma means that living, conscious force who has no beginning and no end. The Christians have a ray theory of individual existence. Ray means you begin from one point and continue ad infinitum in a particular direction. That's Christian theology. Vedic understanding of the Atma is that there's no beginning and no end. At both ends, it's going forever. So that's something important to consider. The soul is eternal. Because the soul is eternal, it cannot be subjected to annihilation. It is impossible. So that is a major difference between Krishna consciousness and, say, Buddhism. Buddhism has an official doctrine, an Atman, no soul or no Atma. So this is not the teaching of the Vedas. Vedas are teaching that we exist. Ayam Brahma, Ayam Atma, Aham Brahmasmi. These things are there. That eternal, conscious, blissful living entity, that is us. So we're not ever going to be annihilated. Considering this, we have to consider, what do we want to do now? We have choices to make. If there is never a time when I did not exist, as Krishna says, nor any time in the future when any of us will cease to be, then we have to make some decisions. What to do? Now I'm a human being. Now I have the option to investigate this wisdom and to practice this discipline of Krishna consciousness. Am I going to do it or not? We have to make that choice. It's a very, very weighty choice, because if we squander our time in this world, then we can end up in one of these unfortunate worlds. We can end up in one of these unfortunate forms. Or at best, we can end up in one of these highly distracting forms like the Devatas and waste more time. So the best thing is to act now in Krishna consciousness. And that is easily done simply by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. I think you had a question also?
Krishna says, Aham eva asana. So in the beginning only he was, and we are supposed to be parts of him. So at some point Krishna created the parts, which is us. So does Krishna create from time to time more parts?
No, this is not true, because this is figurative language. When we say in the beginning there was only Narayan and there was no Shiva, no Brahma, etc., etc. No, the living entities are part and parcel of Narayan. So in that sense you can say that there was nothing but Narayan. But Narayan means Narayan and all of his energy. You cannot separate. And certainly prominent in the energies of Lord Narayan are his parts and parcels, the jivas. Jiva Bhuta Sanatanaha. We say Jiva Bhuta means they're created as jivas, but they're created as jivas eternally. How do you figure that out logically? It doesn't really work. Strictly speaking, it's not true that we were ever created. But for the sake of conceptualizing this situation, we have to say that. And Krishna even himself says it. Jiva Bhuta. There's no question of Bhuta. Na Bhuto na bhavishyati. We're already there. But for the sake of conceiving of this, very difficult subject matter. We say that the living entities were created. Is that okay?
Yes.
So Krishna doesn't require to create new living beings. He's already perfect, he's already infinite, they're already there.
And he includes us. When we say Krishna, it means everyone.
Yes, everyone is included. Krishna means Krishna and his energy. That's why we chant Hare Krishna. Hare means the energy of the Lord, Radharani ultimately. Supreme manifestation of Krishna's inconceivable energy, his internal energy is Srimati Radharani. But all the other energies are included within her also. Durga is nothing but the curdled form, you can say, of Srimati Radharani or Srimati Lakshmi. So, in the same way that Lord Shiva is like Vishnu, curdled Vishnu, so in the same way. And Krishna means Krishna in all of his parts and parcels, because Krishna is not complete without them. And Krishna is complete. So that means we're there.
I have another question. In the Quran,
In the Quran,
it was supposedly said that the Muslims who kill the Kafirs, which is everyone else, apart from those who believe in Allah, they go to the heavenly planets. So I'm wondering, like with meat eating, having 4 wives. So we just discussed that sinless persons go to the heavenly planets according to the Bhagavad-gītā. So, Quran is a literature and personal subject to everyone, I suppose.
yeah, of course, I'm not an expert on Islam, so I can't speak with authority on that. But, I mean, in general, Srila Prabhupada seemed to be very liberal about this, and he said that, if you're a Muslim, then you follow your Islamic teachings. If you're a Christian, you follow those teachings. The point is that whatever they teach, you should follow that.
Yes.
The problem is that if someone is claiming to be whatever he claims to be, but he's not following that thing, some discipline hona chahiye. This is the point. Kuch karna padega. So, people don't follow. This is the problem that Prabhupada has. Otherwise, if you want to say you're in this, okay, so let Muhammad sponsor you and good luck. Or let Jesus Christ sponsor you and then we wish you all well. We're going to follow Bhagavad Gita, but we have to follow Bhagavad Gita. We really have to follow. That's the point. Anuprapannā, as this word is used in today's verse.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's very, very important. Don't just, lip service is not enough, actually, as we described in the beginning. You may say that you're this or that, but depending on what you've done, that's where you're going, sir. And you don't really have any say about in that, because the laws of nature are already there. Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam. The Lord is the one he's the one who decides these things, not us. Is that okay?
Yes.
Not sure it's really answering your question, but yes. In front. Yes.
Even though we read and understand all this knowledge, but it doesn't sink in. We get on to our material life. If it really sunk in, then we would really take Krishna consciousness very seriously. Can you comment on that?
Yes, therefore it's prescribed. Nityam bhagavata sevaya. Yeah, regularly you do this. Regularly means actually anukshana. Anantara. There should be no gap, no holes, no intermission of any sort. That's the ideal. But if you cannot do that, okay, but at least nityam. Nityam means nitaprati. You have to do it every day, pratidine. Then hote sab kuch, spasht ho jaye. That's what we hope. Eventually we get it. Eventually everybody gets it, but depending on the intensity of our practice, if we're practicing tivrena bhakti yogena, then very quickly we realize that I don't belong to this world. My home is in Krishna consciousness. Then everything becomes very clear and we don't forget. But if we immediately after the class ends, we go and absorb ourselves in every kind of material distraction, or we associate with non-devotees who are going to infect our hearts with their desires, sangat sanjayate kāma-kāmāḥ. Our desires are born of the association that we embrace. So take a look at that. And this is why we associate with devotees, because even if we're not prepared to scrutinize ourselves, certainly the devotees are prepared to scrutinize us. And it's not so comfortable all the time, but it's actually very merciful of them, because we need that kind of push, and we need that kind of pressure. It helps us. So, yeah, Prabhupada said, hearing that stops when the speaker stops, that's not real hearing. Hearing means you hear something and you start applying it immediately, and you continue applying it. You keep, shravanam, manana, nitidhyasana. You keep going over it in your mind, and you act on it also. Then you realize. This is what he says in chapter 15. You know the verses. So, that's one thing we can say at least. Okay? Yeah, one last question, then we're out of time. No questions. Okay, good. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.